Behind the steel gates of CECOT, El Salvador's war against gangs. The world's biggest and toughest prison for gangs. El Salvador, CECOT. In the heart of El Salvador's relentless war against gang violence stands CECOT, Centro de Confinamiento del Terrorismo, the world's biggest and toughest prison for gangs. Opened in early 2023 by President Nayib Bukele, CECOT is both feared and praised across Latin America. Built to hold over 40,000 inmates, it's not just a prison. It's a symbol of Bukele's iron-fisted crackdown on crime, the birth of a mega-prison. Years before CECOT, El Salvador was known as the murder capital of the world, with brutal gangs like MS-13 and Barrio 18 terrorizing neighborhoods. Extortion, killings, and drug trafficking were rampant. In 2022, President Bukele declared a state of emergency, arresting over 75,000 alleged gang members. But prisons were overcrowded. The country needed something massive. So, deep in Tecoluca, in a remote valley surrounded by hills and razor wire, the government built CECOT, a mega-complex of 236 acres, designed to isolate, dehumanize, and break gang structure. Inside CECOT, a life stripped bare. There are no visitors, no cell phones, no privacy. Inmates are barefoot, shirtless, and marked with tattoos. They sleep on concrete slabs, eat bland food, and are watched 24/7 through AI-powered surveillance cameras and armed guards. A single misstep can lead to solitary confinement in complete darkness, known as the black box. The prison has 8 cell blocks with steel doors, 2,000 surveillance cameras, riot police barracks, no contact with the outside world, biometric scanners at every gate. Even lawyers and families have extremely limited access. Bukele proudly posted viral videos showing tattooed men crouching, chained together like cattle, which sparked international criticism, but local praise. The impact on El Salvador. Since CECOT opened and the crackdown intensified, homicide rates dropped dramatically, reportedly less than 2 per 100,000 in 2023, a record low. Streets once ruled by gangs are now patrolled by police and military. Yet human rights groups have raised concerns. Arbitrary arrests, lack of due process, inhumane prison conditions, deteriorating mental health of inmates. Still, Bukele remains wildly popular, and many Salvadorans feel safer. We are forgotten men, but this place doesn't let us forget what we've done. Carlos Diablo Molina, former MS-13 lieutenant. It was dawn when Carlos was dragged from his cell in San Miguel, chained by the neck, and thrown onto a prison bus headed to CECOT. He had once ruled entire neighborhoods, collecting extortion fees and ordering hits. Now he was just inmate number 032984. As the armored convoy approached Tecoluca, Carlos saw miles of fences, drones in the sky, and the massive gray monolith of CECOT looming like a fortress from hell. Inside, he was stripped, shaved, searched, and assigned to Block 4 MS-only wing. No beds, no soap, just 500 men packed into silence, under the glow of white lights that never turned off. Daily routine in hell. At 4:30 a.m., the alarms blared. Inmates were forced to kneel in silence for roll call. Guards with assault rifles barked orders. Breakfast was a cold tortilla and beans. Every movement was watched not by humans alone, but by facial recognition cameras mounted in the ceiling corners. Carlos spent days in a cage with no contact with his family. His son had disappeared. His younger brother, who tried to leave the gang, had been killed. He began to question everything. One night, the guards dragged him to a dark cell, the black box. No light, no sound. Just concrete and despair. Days blurred. His mind began to fracture. But there, in the dark, he remembered the face of the boy he once was, before MS-13 found him. A new purpose in the pit. Back in the cell block, he met Father Ernesto, a priest-turned-prison chaplain allowed to visit monthly under armed escort. The priest handed Carlos a small Bible and whispered, "Even here, you are not beyond redemption." That book became his anchor. Carlos started sharing it quietly with others. They formed a silent circle of reflection. Men who used to kill now sat meditating, planning to write letters to the outside, hoping someday to become examples for the youth they once led astray. But not everyone wanted peace. El Gato, a feared MS enforcer, reported Carlos to the guards. He claimed Carlos was plotting a rebellion. Within hours, Carlos was transferred to the max security wing, a place where even time stood still. The outside world changes. By 2025, the streets of San Salvador had changed. Mothers walked safely at night. Children played soccer where drive-bys once ruled. But the question remained, what price was paid for peace? Some former gang members, now in CECOT, began writing anonymous letters to newspapers and NGOs. Stories of torture, beatings, starvation. Some letters were fake, but others sparked investigations. Carlos's letters, smuggled through a corrupt guard, reached the desk of Ana Moran, a young journalist. His words were raw, powerful. We were beasts, but now we are in a cage of beasts. I don't ask for release, only for truth to be seen. Not all of us are who we were. Ana published an exposé titled The Other Side of CECOT, triggering international attention. The UN sent observers. The government denied abuse but quietly began. On a humid July morning in 2025, Rosa Molina stood outside the heavy iron gates of CECOT, holding nothing but a crumpled photograph of her son, Carlos Diablo Molina, and a faded letter he had sent her 3 months before he died. Carlos was a gang member, yes, but to Rosa, he was the boy who used to help her sell mangoes in the market, who cried when his father abandoned them, and who once dreamed of becoming a mechanic. She had come for answers, but CECOT gave none. They said he died in his sleep, she told a foreign journalist who happened to be outside the facility. But I know my son. That prison changed him. He was trying. Rosa became one of dozens of mothers across El Salvador forming the CECOT Victims Alliance, a growing group of women demanding accountability, visitation rights, and proper burial for inmates who died inside. Their chant, No somos madres de criminals. Somos madres de seres humanos. We are not mothers of criminals. We are mothers of human beings. Their cause gained traction on social media. A video of Rosa speaking outside the prison went viral, catching the attention of human rights groups in Europe and the United States. President Bukele responded on X. Our prisons aren't hotels. Criminals don't get special treatment. El Salvador is finally safe. We will not go back. But the global spotlight had been lit. Inside CECOT, Sergeant Luis Barrera had seen more than he cared to remember. A veteran of the Salvadoran military, he was assigned to CECOT when it opened. At first, he believed in it. We were cleaning the country, he told himself, locking away the monsters. But monsters come in many forms. He watched men beaten for speaking out of turn. He saw prisoners denied medication, water, and even sunlight. Worst of all, he saw how young men, barely 18, were thrown in alongside serial killers, stripped of any chance at reform. I began to feel it, Barrera later confessed in an anonymous interview. We weren't just keeping the peace. We were becoming what we feared. His breaking point came when an inmate collapsed during work detail. The medics never came. The man died at Barrera's feet. That night, Barrera took a risk. He began secretly documenting abuses. Dates, names, photos, even video clips on a hidden SD card. For months, he smuggled the data out through a friend who worked on the outside. By 2026, his files formed the backbone of a confidential report published by an international NGO titled Life Behind the Walls, The Hidden Reality of CECOT. The government labeled it fake news, but whispers of truth spread. In an undisclosed location outside San Salvador, a 24-year-old hacker known only by the alias Lince accessed the CECOT internal network. He had once been a gang courier, but escaped arrest and turned his skills to digital warfare. Using a backdoor through a contractor's weak login, Lince downloaded surveillance footage from inside CECOT, including the infamous black box, where prisoners were kept in pitch darkness for weeks. The footage showed chained inmates curled in corners, skin festering, bones visible. Lince uploaded the clips anonymously to the dark web, where they were quickly picked up by investigative journalists. It sparked mass protests in parts of San Salvador, and even drew the attention of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Bukele responded with strength, doubling military presence around the prison and arresting dozens of alleged gang sympathizers. He called Lintz a cyber-terrorist. But the public mood had shifted slightly. Not everyone applauded anymore. In 2026, under mounting international pressure, El Salvador reluctantly agreed to allow a United Nations human rights delegation to inspect CECOT. What they found was shocking. Over 300 deaths since the prison opened. Dozens from untreated diseases, others from malnutrition or suspicious injuries. Entire blocks without running water for days. Psychological trauma widespread. The report didn't demand CECOT be shut down, but it did call for urgent reforms, judicial reviews, and better transparency. Bukele rejected the report but quietly began implementing changes. Certain prisoners were transferred to rehabilitation centers. Some younger inmates were given the option to enroll in work and education programs. A Truth and Reconciliation Council was proposed, though never fully implemented. In a twist of fate, the writings of Carlos Diablo Molina, found after his death and smuggled out by the corrupt guard, were compiled into a book titled Letters from the Pit, One Man's Journey Through Hell. It became a bestseller in Central America. The book was used in schools, universities, and youth outreach programs to educate young people about gang life, prison, and redemption. Carlos, once a feared gang leader, had become a posthumous symbol of change and warning. Rosa Molina, now older and with gray streaks in her hair, was invited to speak at the United Nations in New York City in 2027. Standing at the podium, she said, "My son was a criminal, but he died trying to be more. Let us not build prisons so big that no light can escape them." As of 2028, CECOT still operates, though under greater oversight. El Salvador remains safer than in decades past, but the debate over CECOT's legacy is far from over. Was it a necessary evil or a brutal overreach? In a small mural painted near San Salvador's downtown, a boy is depicted looking through a steel gate at a dove flying over barbed wire. Below it are words that echo across the country. La paz no es impone, se construye. Peace is not imposed, it is built. As if bluer, whiter, almost unreal. He hadn't seen daylight without a cage since 2024. At 23 years old, Miguel had spent half his life inside gang culture. Recruited at 12. First gun at 14. First murder at 15. But it wasn't until he was caught with tattoos, accused of gang ties during the mass sweeps of 2022, that he entered the fortress of CECOT, even though he had already left the gang a year before. His release in 2028 was part of a pilot rehabilitation program, approved after mounting international scrutiny. Only 120 men were chosen from a list of 40,000. Miguel had earned it by becoming a model inmate. Never disciplined, completed every internal course, and even began writing poetry in a battered notebook. But freedom, Miguel learned, came with new chains. He returned to a different San Salvador. Streets were safer, but jobs were scarce, especially for ex-inmates. His old neighborhood, Colonia 22 de Abril, had changed, repainted walls, military patrols, but still haunted by silence. People stared when they saw the faded tattoos on his hands. Miguel found shelter at Casa Nueva Luz, a church-run rehabilitation center for ex-gang members. There, he met Father Ernesto, the same priest who once visited CECOT. "You survived the worst prison," the priest told him. "Now you must survive the world that doesn't forgive." Miguel began sharing his story in schools. The first time, he trembled. He saw the same hunger, rage, and hopelessness in the eyes of the boys in the back row that he once carried. But he spoke anyway. He told them of the stench of the black box, of friends who died nameless, of a letter he wrote every night in CECOT, to a mother who could no longer read it. One of the students came up after and said, "I was going to join MS, but maybe not anymore." That night, Miguel cried. El Salvador, the political storm, a nation on edge. While stories like Miguel's gave hope, El Salvador was entering a new political storm. President Nayib Bukele, now in his second term, remained wildly popular. But cracks had begun to show. Over 3,000 wrongful arrests were confirmed between 2022 to 2027. The allegations of extrajudicial killings by police surfaced. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights demanded accountability. Bukele, defiant as ever, launched CECOT 2.0, proposing the expansion of the prison to include forced labor industries, sugarcane harvesting, clothing factories, and even prison-made bricks to rebuild poor neighborhoods. Let them pay their debt with work, he said. Opposition parties and activists condemned it as modern-day slavery. Protests erupted in the capital. Among the demonstrators was Rosa Molina, now leading a national coalition of families. "We want peace, not punishment without end," she shouted through a megaphone. Bukele's government responded with curfews, censorship, and the deployment of drones to monitor protesters. The country was at a crossroads. In late 2028, under pressure from both domestic groups and international institutions, the Salvadoran Congress introduced the CECOT Reforms Act. It proposed independent oversight of prison conditions, rehabilitation programs inside CECOT, regular mental health evaluations for inmates, a review panel for cases arrested without trial. The act was fiercely debated. Some claimed it would weaken the war on crime. Others saw it as the first real step toward justice. Miguel Rivera testified before Congress. He stood in a clean shirt, with his hands trembling slightly, and read from his prison notebook. "CECOT broke my body, but inside, I found my soul. If we don't help those men rebuild themselves, they will return worse than they came. Let us not create monsters we cannot control." It was broadcast nationwide. His voice echoed across a divided land. Globe showing Europe, Africa, where the world stands. In 2029, El Salvador is a nation in transition. A crime remains at historic lows. A CECOT still operates, but now under partial civilian oversight. Over 1,200 inmates have joined rehabilitation programs, but over 36,000 remain in near-total isolation, with thousands still awaiting trial. Miguel now leads a non-profit called Vidas Segundas, Second Lives, offering housing, training, and counseling to men released from CECOT. His story has been adapted into a documentary, and his poetry has been translated into 5 languages. Rosa Molina visits schools across the country, sharing Carlos's story and calling for mercy, not for the crimes, but for the broken systems that made them inevitable. And deep inside CECOT, new letters are being written, quiet reflections from those still in the dark, hoping their words, too, might one day reach the light. Black Nib final words. In the heart of the world's most brutal prison, a paradox lives. A violence was crushed, but so were voices. An order returned, but at what cost? A peace was found, but is it built to last? As El Salvador writes the next chapter of its history, CECOT stands not just as a prison, but a mirror, reflecting both the horror of unchecked crime and the dangers of unchecked power. Only time will tell which image will define its legacy.